Hi, so here we are now with this lecture, which is about the principle of progressive overload. We have obviously done the principle of individualization or individuality earlier, which was a very interesting topic. This is also equally important, and probably I would say these two make the crux of most training programs. Okay, so what is progressive overload? The word progressive, it means what? Progression, you move, right? Overload is what? You are loading something beyond its capacity. Cool. So now I want you guys to first maybe look at this picture out there. Okay, the picture which shows some dumbbells. When you look at this picture, what is it that you can see? What notes can you make of it? Just take a moment, a few seconds, make up your mind what you see. So now you've had a good look. What is it that we can sense in this picture? Very simple, they are dumbbells. So these are used for loading. These are used for training a muscle and making them stronger. What is it that we see in these dumbbells? Are they all the same? Obviously not. There's one which is a 1 kilo, 2, 3, 4, 5, and of course there are more dumbbells out there as people train which are heavier. So all these dumbbells are different. So not all weight training is the same, okay, and not all load is the same. So this picture signifies, and I chose this picture specifically because it signifies a lot. It is simple, but it has a lot of meaning. When you're training, you cannot be training everybody with the same load, and you cannot be training with the same load all the time. These two sort of rules, if you understand, okay, the principle of individualization would mean that you don't just use the same weight for everybody, and that same person cannot be training with 1 kilo or 2 kilos throughout their life or whatever weight they do, right? There has to be some change, so for that body to adapt to a different load. So that's what the whole idea is of this lecture. So we move on now to the next slide, which will sort of give us an idea of what is progressive overload and how can we actually make somebody get stronger with our training programs by using this principle. So now in progressive overload, you can see I've put up some points or down. Okay, one is the different methods of overloading. So how do you get stronger? Okay, there's a certain way which I'll explain in the gas principle, but I've also explained some of the methods. Then also why it is important to progress in lifting. Why can't you lift the same weight for all the time? Then if you do overload and if you want to get stronger, and if you do it too much, what are the disadvantages? That also we need to know. Then comes the general adaptation syndrome, what that principle applies. And then at the bottom I've put something in Hindi, obviously, or mehnat karo, because these are very common words that are used in training, right? And the no pain, no gain mindset. In English you sometimes hear, the no pain, no gain, right? So we'll be talking about these interesting topics as we go ahead. So here we are with the methods of overload. Now you want to get stronger, right? Somebody, an athlete, you want them to be stronger than what they are today in maybe 4 weeks time. How do you do that? One, you give them a weight, and let's say we take a simple example of very common exercise, bicep curls. If you want to strengthen their bicep muscle, you would give them a X amount of weight, and let's say they do it today with 3 kilos, right? Over a period of time now you want them to get stronger because that strength might not be enough for that particular sport. So what would you do to make them stronger? After 4 weeks, you might then want from 3 kilos to move on to maybe 4, 5, depends, where you started, but you would definitely want them to lift more. So that's one way, right? What's the other thing that you can do? In 4 weeks, do you have to only increase weight, or can you also increase the repetitions? So if today with 3 kilos, a person, let's say there's a very small young girl, she's able to do with 3 kilos 10 repetitions. Can we also look at a choice where we can make her do more repetitions so she gets stronger? Obviously we can, right? So somebody who's wanting to get stronger has a choice of increasing the weight, also has a choice of increasing the repetitions. They will both have slightly different outcomes, but still these are the methods by which we can make the exercise tougher, right? So let's say today that particular young girl is doing one set of 3 kilos, 10 repetitions. after 4 weeks she does 15, right? Or she has increased weight, like I said. Now what else can we do to make it harder? We can make her do more sets. If today she's doing um, 10 reps, maybe in the next week we can make her do 2 sets of 10 reps. So she does 10, stops, takes a break of maybe 30 seconds, 45 seconds, does another set of the same weight, same repetition. So there's now more work which has happened, this, and there's one more set, right? What else can be done? Okay, over a period of time. Now for the same very simple exercise, there are of course various exercises and various modifications, progressions and regressions. So what else can be done to make that exercise harder? A simple exercise like bicep curls. Over a period of time, maybe not very applicable to sport, this particular exercise, but still it can be made harder by that same movement being made slightly more complex. So how can that be done? You make them lower the weight under control. So you focus on what's called the eccentric contraction. So instead of now doing 10 at this speed and 2 sets or 3 sets, now we can change it by making them go up and down slow. 1, 2, 3, down. 1, 1, 2, 3, down. Okay, we can do that. We can also add some exercises for that simple exercise. For the simple move is like keep your arms on a preacher bench and do an exercise where the load changes because of the way the fulcrum changes, okay, where the joint is, okay, and how it loads the bicep, feels it a bit more because of the way you've changed where the movement happens. So again, that can be done. So various ways by which an exercise can be made harder. A push-up, if we take an example, when somebody is not able to do push-ups and just initially they start with their knees down and do push-ups, over time, how do you make it hard? You let them get their knees up. When they can go down full and do that properly, how do you make it harder? You make them do it slower. Okay, you can add eccentric. How do you make it even harder? You can make them then move on to doing it on a handstand. Okay, these stands, so they go deeper. How can you make it even harder? You make them then do it with 1 foot off. Okay, so then they're controlling and it becomes what's called a 3-point push-up. So it's 1, 2 and just 1 foot instead of 2. Okay, so there's various progressions. You can make them then move on to a Swiss ball, okay, where there'll be more stability. Okay, you want to make that harder, you make sure that the Swiss ball, their hands are unstable, you make their feet go on a bench. So it becomes, now of course this becomes very advanced technically, but this is how you can improve or rather increase the complexity of an exercise, so that there's a challenge, okay, for the athlete. What is the other way you can make this harder? Let's say now somebody is doing 2 sets or 3 sets of the same exercise and you were giving them a rest period of 45 seconds and they recover in that and do that set. You can make it harder by making them reduce the rest period. From 45 you can reduce that rest period to 30 seconds. So there's a bit of what's called incomplete recovery between sets. Okay, and this is of course applied to sets in technical sports as well. When they do an X movement and then when they come back to do the second the same drill again, you can make it harder but just reducing the rest period. Okay, these principles can be applied to sports training, technical of course pretty well, but we absolutely have to, because this is how we can make the exercise more challenging for the athlete. And of course that challenge has to make sense at the end. You just don't have to make it challenging because you have to ask, ultimately any exercise at any point has to help the technical sport. What's the other thing you can do by reducing is you can make it even shorter. You can make between 2 sets, reduce the rest period to 15 seconds. It will become even harder than getting rest for 30 seconds, right? So these are the various ways, increasing weight, repetitions, increasing reps, increasing the number of sets, making it more complex, making it harder to perform that movement, and reducing rest periods. Okay, so these become the main ways to increase overload on a muscle to make it stronger than what it is. Now coming to the importance of progression, okay, how sort of you make it, why is it important to do this, okay, for progression and to increase this progression? Because obviously you want a muscle or even an energy system, okay, in the body to be able to cope with higher load. How do you do this? There's what's again called the FITT, sometimes this is also called the fit principle, and you can manipulate, you can use these things to make it again harder, so that the player can cope with more number of a greater load which they would most likely experience in competition or that their sport requires. So the first one is frequency of workouts or training. So what is frequency? Frequency is nothing but the number of times you work out. So if this week you have made the athlete do 4 sessions, okay, of SNC, next week if you make it 5, you made it harder, right? Depending on the requirements and when the competition is, then you will adjust. These experienced coaches know how to adjust this frequency, okay, and the number of workouts that are necessary in a week. Because obviously if 1 hour of strength training is good for an ex-athlete, then if we do it next day and so on, and we train for 6 days, would it not be nice if they can do 3 hours of training every day, 4 hours, 5 hours? Where does it stop? Okay, that is where common sense comes in. That's where science also comes in. So we have to know how much they recover. So frequency is the number of times you make a person train in a week or in a month, and you should know how much is important. Ultimately, we want to find that particular secret, if we may call it, or that particular formula which works for that particular person. One formula doesn't work for everybody. So frequency is that part where we know how many workouts help an X amount of an X person to train, right? Now then we go to the next one, which is intensity of workout. Now how can intensity be measured? What is intensity? Intensity is like to know, it's like a percentage. If I have to ask somebody, how hard is your workout? Somebody says, oh, it was very tough. Okay, it was very hard today. Then how hard? So sometimes a simple way to gauge is you give athletes score of say 0 to 10. So you can ask them, like, if 0 means you found that workout not like as if you didn't even do, and 100 was such that you couldn't have done even one more set after that. So if that is the case, then you have to ask how much score would you give. If if 0 is that and 100, or you can even use 10, okay, is the most extreme. Then if they say I worked at 50% or it was 5 out of 10, then you know that okay, they sort of trained at a certain level and they can recover from that. If they say it was like a 7 out of 10, or it was 75% effort, I could have still pushed a bit more, then again you should be able to gauge that okay, tomorrow how much can this person do. So this is intensity. It can be of course measured with some calculations as well, when the amount of weight that a person takes, the amount of reps that they can complete with an X amount of weight, that can be done. For cardiovascular endurance, heart rate is used to monitor intensity. So there are various ways, okay. Whichever way you use, make sure it applies and is practical to the athlete. It can be used. It is not about the best formula. It is about the formula that can be used. If you have the best formula which is not applicable, doesn't make sense. I'm going to go about this in smart training, why certain aspects are important. So we'll be getting in the lectures about that on smart training. So now after frequency and intensity, what's the other thing? The T, that stands for the time spent in working out. Okay, so you worked X amount of days, you worked at this level, then comes the time. If you're training overall, 1 hour, and then next time you travel for 1.5 hours, you train for 1.5 hours. Is it the same? Obviously not. There are two different loads. Okay, so time spent in the workout is also a crucial way to know how much load is going on, okay, and how you can make this progression effective. Then comes the type. Type is what modality are you using in training? Are you making them lift weights for a specific reason? Are you making them do body weight training? Are you making them do drills out on the ground? Are you making them do maybe something very basic for stability because they are recovering from an injury and have just started coming back? So that is the type. So the type of exercise you choose. So this is the importance of progression. Okay, you need to know how many times you train, the intensity, the time spent, and the type. Okay, this almost is like an extension of what we spoke earlier. Okay, like the reps. So this is an extension of those same principles. You can use these also to create a workout where you know exactly what you're working on. Okay. Now there's something which is used which is called the 10% rule. It's not a rule, it is you can say a philosophy which can be used, and what's called one at a time rule. So what is a 10% rule? Very interesting. Listen to this carefully. It will help you in increasing overload without going overboard. Okay. Now the 10% rule is this. Let's say you have a person who is able to do a drill which is a running drill, and they are able to run for 10 minutes. Now if they are able to run for 10 minutes, now you want to make it a bit harder for them, right? Because it's sort of become easy. How hard can you make it? This becomes a very crucial point for lots of coaches. They want to make it harder. How hard is good enough? So that's where the 10% rule comes in. So if you're making them run for 10 minutes, how much is 10% of 10 minutes? 1 minute, right? So when you increase the time, make them run for 11 minutes. Let them get used to that 11 minutes over time. Then you will add another 10% of it. So the 10% of 11 will be what? You know, it goes to around 1.10. So gradually you increase like this by adding just 10%. This 10% is generally a safe amount to load, where the load is not too much for the athlete so that it shocks them, their system, and gives them an injury. Okay. The same can be applied to weights as well. If there's somebody who's doing weight training and they are now say doing 100 kilo squat, and they're able to do that quite comfortably over time, and they're able to do, let's say, 10 repetitions. Okay. What do? Do you want to then increase weight, right, or increase reps? You can do both ways. If you're increasing reps, you add one repetition more. You make them do 11 for a while till they get comfortable. Okay. Or the other thing to do is you add 10 kilos there. So from 100 you make it 10. You can even be lesser with weight. Sometimes it's better to be careful. You can even make it lesser, need not be 10% of that weight. Okay. It can even be 5 kilos or 5%. But it's better to do less than more in sport and strength and conditioning, because once something breaks, you can't go back. So it's important to do these increments very low. It obviously wouldn't make sense for somebody who's running for 10 minutes and next thing you say, okay, today is 10, and this is a very common mistake technical coaches make, and even strength and conditioning coaches sometimes. Today you've run 10 and next time you just come and you make them run, 20 minutes, because why? Okay, that's how we get strong. 20 minutes. There's no progression. Okay, just within a week you're like, okay, this is what we do. Has the person's body coped? Have you checked if they have coped? So this is important to understand for us, right? The next sort of philosophy you can use is that one at a time. What does this mean? So if you are going to now change, let's say for somebody who's doing sprints, okay, and they are running at a certain pace, or as of now they're, let's say, doing 10 minutes continuous runs. Now you want to make it harder. Now one way is, of course, you can make them run a minute longer. The other way is you can make them run faster. The other way is maybe you can, if they're wearing a weight jacket, you can probably use that with light weights. So there's various ways, right, to do that. If they're running on a treadmill, you can increase the incline. So you can keep doing a lot of things, complexity which can be increased. Now what if you use all of these together? Does it make sense? Obviously not. You don't want to add so much of load from all possible angles that the body can't take. So it's one at a time. Okay, use one. If you're increasing the repetitions, don't increase the weight. Okay, don't reduce the rest period. Don't make it more complex. At a time, add only one aspect. If it's repetitions, that's good enough. If it's sets you've increased, okay, it's from one set you've made it two. Don't make the repetitions also increase now. Keep the other things, so one at a time. Okay, this is something which is very simple, very logical, but a lot of people don't do. So hope you get this before we move to the next slide. Now we know why progression is important. We know loading is important. So in progressive overload, progression is important, overload is important, because without overloading you cannot get stronger than what you are, right? So what happens if you overload too much, what goes wrong? Why can't you just keep pushing? Why shouldn't you go with all the aspects and say, let me increase the load, reduce the rest period, let me do more reps? Why can't we do that? Why can't we just work hard all the time? One, because you'll get overtrained. The athlete will get overtrained. Second, the most important aspect probably of any sporting career, because of overloading, you can miss peaking at the right time. You want an athlete to peak for competition, right? You might end up loading them so much that they are so overtrained by the time they go to competition, they are still not recovered and fresh. What do you want for an athlete during competition? Do you want them to get there tired? Do you want them to get there fatigued? Or do you want them to get there strong, light? Feeling nice and light, feeling very strong, very confident. How do you want them? Obviously, you want them to be strong, right? You want them to feel light. You want them to feel fresh, looking forward to taking part. This is what overloading does. If you overload too much, okay, and rather than overloading, I would call it overtraining. You will be there at a competition with your athletes who's just so sort of dead from training, so exhausted and so down, they won't be able to perform. So this is one of the drawbacks, and this happens quite often, okay. In our over enthusiasm to train hard, we sometimes push people more than what they can recover. So again, an important point to remember, keep this in mind. What happens again if you push too much, okay, you're constantly training hard and you're moving, what can happen? Overuse injuries. You've trained so much that your joints are not able to take that load because you're constantly pushing. You're telling the athlete to run faster, you're giving them more sets, you're pushing them, and you think like that's how it is, right? But what will happen? At a certain point, the body can't take it. There's always a threshold for every body. When it reaches that, it breaks. Do you like somebody who's broken? Would it help anybody if there's an athlete who's trained so much that now they are strained? So training is not for straining. Okay, training is for strengthening. Training is for gaining. Okay, so this has to be understood as well. What are the other things that can happen is improper technique. Now, how can technique be affected if you have overtrained? If there's a player who's, a tennis player, and he or she, has a good serve and their forehand, backhand is really good, nice crisp shots, they've got good power. How can the technique go bad if you overtrain? The reason is because once you're exhausted, your muscles won't be able to function at that same rate. Okay, the firing will change, the signaling from the brain to the muscles will change. What can happen then? One is your technique will go bad. So when you're tired, you will only train wrong. So that's why they say, technique doesn't make you perfect. Proper technique makes you perfect. Okay, and proper technique can only be done when you're fresh. This is something very simple, but again we don't understand. We think no, you can be tired and still. So people still keep training when they're tired. What happens? Let's take an example of somebody who's in tennis who's practicing serves, and there's X amount. They've done maybe 20, 30 serves, which they are very good at, feeling good. But they think like, no, I have to do a lot more. And then someday they're practicing possibly, all of a sudden random maybe 150 serves, okay, just a random number, but more than what they can take. What will happen as they start getting tired? Can they serve perfectly? When they're fatigued, can they throw the ball and connect at the right time? Obviously not. And this is when a wrong contact point, okay, this is where you get all those sprains and strains, that we don't want, right? So make sure that you don't load so much that the technique gets affected, and the technique will get affected. As people are tired, their landing patterns change, and this happens in badminton. If you see, when people are very fatigued, the jump and the land goes off, okay, and sometimes there's opportunities to finish a shot and they cannot. This happens across sports when people are tired due to various reasons. In some sports like cricket, people can get exhausted due to the sun because it's just hot and they're still fielding, they're standing there, so that can be something. So there's already enough reasons for people to get tired and fatigued. Okay, we shouldn't add to it by just adding more in the gym. Okay, what's the other things that can happen? What are the disadvantages of overload other than the ones we've mentioned? The negative impacts can be, your heart rate. The athlete's heart rate can be high. their blood pressure can increase, they can lose appetite, they might not feel like eating due to overtraining, they can be losing weight, sleeping can become a problem, difficulty, fatigue can be there, they're just tired all the time, mood swings, they might feel like very down and feeling just lethargic, and they are not very positive, muscle tiredness, soreness all the time, body hurting. In fact, these can be very good signs for any strength coach to know how their student is feeling. Before designing a program, if you can find out how they are feeling, and this can be just by normal talk, this can help you amazingly in designing programs. And if I have to give like a tip and something that I use, every workout, I think over the decades that I've trained people and those who train with me, and even my assistants follow this, the standard first question when they enter the gym is, how are you feeling today? And this gives you a very simple answer from them. They will tell you practice was very hard in the pool, in the courts, in the ground. So if that was hard, then you get to know where they are today. If they're tired and your plan was to make them do something new, you hold back, right? Should you hold back, or as a coach should you say, I don't care what you did in the pool, or I don't care, you are going to do my workout, I am this no nonsense man, I am not here to listen to how you feel, you have to fit into my program, I will not adjust to your body pains because I'm the strong coach. Funny, right? But this is what actually happens. Sometimes we all make this mistake. We get too much into this very hardcore sort of a cool person who is like this very hard, who's always harsh on the students. I'm hard enough to break. What's the point? Who benefits? So that's where common sense comes in. Hard training is important. How hard is what we need to know. Now coming to the general adaptation syndrome. Okay, this is the gas principle, which is called, so why people shouldn't train too much is because this is how the body works. Okay, so there's first in this is what's called the alarm reaction state. Okay, this is where you lift something. So let's say you lift or you run or you do any exercise, and first time the body gets adapted to this stress. Any dumbbell, any weight, any running is nothing but stress to the body, right? You're moving when it was resting suddenly. So that stress leads to some amount of what's written there, DOMS, is your delayed onset of muscle soreness, right? Delayed onset muscle soreness is something where the muscles start feeling sore after training. So this is important. You need to, of course, get stronger by doing more than what you're used to. So that stress is important. That is what changes the body's basic equilibrium, right? So now that stress, how much is the key, and that's what we've learned in the previous slides, right? So the first stage is the alarm reaction, meaning the body feels like, oh my God, what is this? Somebody's made me lift. So the body feels that, okay, now what do I do? So over time, the body gets into adaptation mode. It says like, okay, this person's trained and made me lift this weight. Tomorrow they're doing again. So it starts preparing. Slowly, it starts adapting to that load. That is called the resistance development stage. So it starts developing resistance to that particular load. Okay. And it gets stronger. So this is how we get stronger. You load, then you slowly get resistant to it, okay, and you become stronger. And then comes the stage though, and this is what we have to understand. Beyond a certain point, if you keep loading, then the body can't resist. It can't take it anymore. That's where we get to what's called the exhaustion state. What is exhaustion state? It is intolerable stress. So stress is good to make you better, just like mental stress. Not every stress is bad. It keeps us motivated, it makes us do things. But intolerable stress, which you can't take anymore, mental, same applies to physical, gets to a point where then you push the body so much that you start getting these stress fractures. Sometimes you have people who do a lot of running, they get stress fractures in their shin bones, you get muscle strains, you get ligament sprains, right? You start getting all these issues. You can have joint pain, sometimes just stiffness, because you are so exhausted that even mentally you are fatigued. Sometimes you'll see athletes, they're like, oh my God, I don't know, you just give up. This is the time when most injuries happen. This is the time you don't want to get to exhaustion so much that the person is now getting into negative. Okay, so there's always, it's like a tonic. Exercises like medicine. You want to give enough to the point where they feel good, or tonic to the point where they feel good. You don't want to give so much that that tonic becomes a poison in itself. Okay. Okay, the last point now, and this I had to put in so that we kind of can understand this part. Now, और मेहनत करो बेटा, और मेहनत करो, तुम और कर सकते हो, तुम्हारे अंदर तो एकदम मतलब बहुत ही एकदम अच्छी क्षमता है, कर सकते हो, लगे रहो. We love to hear this. Sometimes it's coaches who really push in, and they have this thing of like everything's about grit and passion and like about pushing. Sounds nice, isn't it? Does it work in real life? Can the body read where you just say push, push, push all the time? This is a question you have to ask yourself. Okay. Another thing, the English side of the or mehnat karo is the no pain, no gain. How can you gain anything without pain? Okay. So we have to ask ourselves, how much pain? If you're working hard, how hard is more important than just hard? Okay. So these mindsets have destroyed a lot of careers as well. Not that any coach, any strength and conditioning coach wouldn't want to injure their players, right? Who would want? We all want to improve. And this is where comes the actions and intentions. An intention can be very good. You want to make somebody work hard so they can improve. But your action, you might be pushing them so much that they can't recover. So this or mehnat karo sort of approach that people have. Sometimes, I have seen this over the years with coaches. Someone comes back after a competition, and says, sir, मैं हार गया, अब क्या करें सर, बुरा रिजल्ट था. And the coach will be like, हाँ मुझे तो पता ही था, तुम तो मेहनत कर ही नहीं रहे थे, देखा ना क्या हुआ, हार गए, अब अगली बार जीतना है तो क्या करना है, और मेहनत करो. Okay, fine, let's take that, he's saying that, you have to work harder next time. Fair enough. What happens when a player comes after winning? Okay, comes back, everybody is happy, says, sir, मैं जीत गया, good. Okay, good, जीते रहो. ठीक है, अब ज़्यादा खुश मत हो ना, और मेहनत करनी है. So now the question is, where does this mehnat end? If you lose, you have to work hard. You win, you have to work harder. Now, does anybody know how much? And isn't that important? So what's important is to know how hard to work. Just saying that you have to work harder is like saying, if one paracetamol tablet is not helping you, take two. What does an expert do? What does a doctor do? The doctor knows the end limit, how much is safe, how many tablets to take. That is where a professional, that is where the clever person comes in. Okay. It can't be just keep doing something if it's not working, just or mehnat. So this or mehnat mindset is, with good intentions, but we have to know that the actions and the results might not most likely be the best. Next, point, Hollywood, Bollywood inspired training movies. Okay, we have all seen all the Hollywood movies, with boxers running, there's music going on, nice, upbeat music. Gyms are now flooded with music, right, of such type. Now, should we watch these movies, come back home and say that, oh, I've seen this movie, and what the hero, he really has worked out so hard, and there's always going to be that one sequence where there's a song, the person's lost, and then there's a song which is generally happening in even Bollywood films and even in the Hollywood ones, something, and there's expressions, the hero looks up and so on and so forth, and then next thing obviously they go and play and they win. We're all happy, movie ends, we come home and we think, wow, that is it. Does that happen in real life? In real life, are there slow motion shots? Are those expressions important, or is performance important? So movies, we all love movies, we like to watch, it's good for relaxation. But understand that movies are movies. That movie has an actor to act. Most of the times it's not even a real depiction of what actually happened. That has to be slightly glamorized. There has to be some added spice to make it a bit more watchable. Sport, when you watch, and some of the best performances that you will see, you can feel very happy. But when you go there and stuff, it's really nothing. It's some of the best performances you'll see of an athlete is just another day. It's just like practice. It just happens and you feel happy. So we have to understand that our training need not be very dramatic. If anything, and I've said this a lot of times in my posts, and when I do conferences or lectures, I say a good coach, a good strength and conditioning coach, and any good professional will not add drama to the training. They will take the drama out of sports science and out of training. There's sometimes a lot of drama because drama sells. In today's world, there's so much of sort of social media, there's so much of like stories which are woven around performances. So it's fine, people need to read about, people need to watch movies, fair enough. Should you be adding to the drama? Does it help? So take the drama out. Okay, Bollywood, Hollywood inspired training, watch it, forget it. Okay, come back, put your work where it matters and where you have to create results. Okay, you can't watch something and be inspired by that, something which is not even real, it's not even a real scene, right? If you get inspired by maybe a match, fair enough, but does that apply to your sport? Does that particular person apply, even if it's a top athlete that you follow, does it apply to your player? You have to be very, very logical in your approach. Okay, so all these, what we've gone through now, okay, all these different points, hope they are helping you, and hope this lecture is really helping understand how to take load and what to do and what not to do. So now we've come back, okay, to all those points, methods of overload. You know how to overload your time of rest, increasing importance of progression, disadvantages. You know how the the general adaptation syndrome works. You don't want to get to that exhaustion phase of the gas principle. And the last one, very important, might sound funny, beta aur mehnat karo, sounds nice, but you have to know kitni mehnat. Okay, so anybody talks about mehnat, it's always important to know kitni mehnat. So you should know that itni mehnat kare to ye hota hai. Okay, you lift heavy to ye hota hai, you lift light to ye hota hai. You should know, just aur mehnat karo, lage raho, again, like I always say, some things sound very nice but they don't work. Okay, so this lecture was about that, and hopefully it has helped you understand the whole concept of overload with progression and why overloading is important, but it's important to overload progressively. The answer is in the name itself, progressive overload. So get stronger, but one at a time. Okay, it's like if you want to run someday, and if you're just an average person who wants to sprint, should you start by sprinting today itself? You get somewhere and you say, I will sprint, and you don't take into account anything, the person's age, your age. You think like, oh, but when I was in school I was a very good sprinter. Okay, can you do it today? No, because you're older, so you take that into account. Have you been training? You take that into account. Do you know the technique of doing it? You take that into account. And if you want to sprint, you should first be able to walk, right? You should have good walking, build a certain level of base endurance in walking, then start jogging, okay, then start running, then start sprinting. That's progression. You don't start at the top, you start at the bottom. Progressive overload, you can say, is just like how we load the brain in education. You don't give a PhD thesis to somebody who's in school. Why is that? Because their base is not good yet. Same applies in sport. Hope this lecture helps and helps everybody understand this principle of progressive overload and makes you a better coach and a better strength and conditioning specialist. Thank you.